The wind was quiet that evening, brushing gently through the tall grass and old oak trees, as if nature itself was whispering, "Rest now. All is well." In a quiet part of the world, far beyond busy highways and bright city lights, lay a little-known village called Eldergrove. Eldergrove wasn't marked on any modern map. You couldn't find it by GPS. Travelers stumbled upon it only when their hearts needed peace, though they didn't always know that's what they were looking for. It was the kind of place that appeared only when you needed it most. Clara, a young woman with tired eyes and a soft heart, had been driving for hours. She wasn't running from anything in particular, just running toward quiet. She had packed a small suitcase, left behind the noise of her life, and followed the roads until they turned to gravel, and then to dirt, and finally to a path where the trees leaned close like old friends. As she pulled her car to a gentle stop, the forest around her sighed. The leaves above shimmered in the golden light of a setting sun. She stepped out of the car, closed the door softly, and stood still, just breathing. For a long moment she did nothing but listen, to birds calling home, to wind brushing across branches, to the hum of something ancient and kind, like a lullaby hiding in the trees. Up ahead, past the little stone bridge, stood a cottage. Its roof sloped gently like it was nodding off to sleep. The windows glowed with warm yellow light. Smoke curled from the chimney. A sign above the door, swinging on old iron hooks, read, "The Lantern House Rooms and Rest." Clara walked slowly toward it. Her boots crunched softly on gravel. The air smelled like pine and lavender and something sweet, maybe cinnamon. As she reached the front steps, the door opened before she could knock. An elderly woman stood there. She wore a long cardigan the color of oatmeal, and had hair like silver threads tucked into a neat bun. Her eyes crinkled when she smiled. "You must be tired," the woman said, as if she'd been expecting her. "Come in, dear. You're home now." Clara blinked, surprised by the warmth in the woman's voice. "I thank you," she whispered. Inside, the house was quiet and full of gentle light. Wooden floors creaked under soft rugs. A fireplace crackled in the corner, its flames dancing lazily. There were bookshelves filled with old novels, dried flowers in glass jars, and a kettle humming gently on the stove. "I'm Miriam," the woman said, guiding Clara toward a cozy armchair by the fire. "You rest. I'll make us tea." Clara sat down, sinking into the cushions. Her body began to let go of the tension it had held for months, maybe years. Her fingers relaxed. Her shoulders lowered. Even her heartbeat seemed to soften. Outside the window, twilight deepened. The trees rustled softly, as if they were settling in for the night. The fire crackled. The tea steeped. And Clara, wrapped in a soft blanket, closed her eyes for just a moment longer. The warmth of the tea in Clara's hands was more than just physical. It reached somewhere deep inside, a place that hadn't been touched in a long time. She lifted the cup and took a slow sip. Chamomile, honey, and something faintly floral, perhaps rose hips. It tasted like safety. Miriam settled into the chair across from her, holding her own mug with both hands. The firelight flickered across her calm face. "This place," Clara said softly. "It feels like a dream." Miriam smiled gently. "Some say it is. But it's real enough, especially when you need it. Eldergrove tends to appear when the heart is weary." Clara didn't respond right away. Her eyes were fixed on the dancing fire. Her mind, usually full of to-do lists and deadlines and worries about things that never quite made sense, was quiet now. There was only the fire, the warmth, and the distant sound of an owl calling through the trees. "Do you get many visitors?" she asked. "Only those who are meant to come," Miriam replied. "Travelers. Dreamers. Lost souls looking for peace. You're not the first, Clara." The way she said her name made Clara pause. "How did you?" "I just know," Miriam said simply. "I always know." There was no strangeness in her words, only comfort. Clara didn't question it further. Something about Eldergrove, the trees, the house, the very air, made questions seem unnecessary. After finishing her tea, Miriam led Clara upstairs to a small room at the end of the hall. The walls were painted a soft cream, and the bed was covered in a patchwork quilt. A window looked out over a moonlit garden, where wind chimes danced silently in the breeze. "Sleep here," Miriam said. "You'll rest well tonight." Clara placed her bag on the little bench by the window. She changed into her sleepwear, brushed her hair, and stood for a long time by the glass, watching the moon drift above the treetops. Somewhere below, a fox crossed the garden path. A cat curled up on a stone wall. Everything was calm. She climbed into bed, the quilt soft and heavy, the pillow cool and gentle beneath her cheek. As she closed her eyes, she felt the house around her, not as walls and roof, but as a presence. Something warm. Something old. Something that had watched over many travelers before her. Her breathing slowed. The fire downstairs crackled once more. And in the quiet of Eldergrove, beneath a sky full of stars, Clara drifted into her first dreamless, peaceful sleep in what felt like forever. Clara awoke to birdsong. Not the sharp, sudden kind that jars you from sleep, but a slow, melodic chorus that rose with the morning light. The sun filtered through soft curtains and golden beams, casting gentle patterns across the quilt. For a few seconds she didn't remember where she was, only that she felt light. No buzzing alarms. No traffic outside. Just warmth and silence. She stretched beneath the quilt, then sat up, feeling the wooden floor cool under her bare feet. As she stepped to the window, she saw the world bathed in soft light. The garden below glowed with dew. Hummingbirds hovered near blossoms. A squirrel darted along the fence line. The trees whispered gently, their leaves shimmering in the breeze. Clara dressed slowly, in a thick-knit sweater and soft jeans, and padded downstairs. The air smelled of baking bread and fresh herbs. In the kitchen, Miriam stood by the stove, humming a tune older than time itself. On the table were 2 plates, already set. Warm scones, butter, orange marmalade, and steaming mugs of something that smelled like cinnamon and cream. "Good morning, my dear," Miriam said with a nod. "Did you rest well?" Clara smiled sleepily. "Better than I have in years." "Good," Miriam said, placing the last scone on a plate. "This place, it works gently. You'll feel more yourself each day you stay." They sat together in the morning quiet, sipping and savoring, as though the world had slowed down just for them. After breakfast, Clara wandered outside. The air was crisp, but not cold. Sunlight warmed the stones beneath her shoes. The village of Eldergrove slowly came into view as she followed a little path through the trees. There were no loud shops. No traffic. Just cottages, gardens, and old stone benches under flowering trees. A small stream flowed behind the houses, and an arched wooden bridge spanned its width. She passed an old man tending to a rose bush. He nodded politely. A child skipped along the lane with a basket of berries. Everyone she saw moved slowly, with purpose, like they were all tuned to a gentler rhythm of life. At the edge of the village stood a bookstore, its door slightly open. Inside, the scent of old pages and lavender oil filled the air. Clara stepped in. Behind the counter sat a thin, bearded man with spectacles and a scarf wrapped 3 times around his neck. He looked up and smiled. "Welcome to the Wandering Page," he said. "Books find you here." Clara chuckled softly. "Is that so?" "Indeed," he said, rising and walking to a shelf. "You don't choose the book. The book chooses you." He returned and placed a thin, leather-bound journal in her hands. Its pages were blank. "Sometimes," he said, "the story you need is the one you write yourself." She held the journal close. Somehow, she understood. Eldergrove was not just a place to rest, it was a place to remember who you really were. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Clara stepped back into the light, the journal tucked under her arm, and a gentle peace blooming in her chest. That afternoon, the sky turned a soft silver, and a hush fell over Eldergrove as a light mist drifted in from the woods. It wasn't the kind of weather that made people retreat inside. It was the kind that invited long walks, slow thoughts, and stories told in quiet corners. Clara wandered along the stream, the little journal still tucked under her arm. She hadn't written anything yet, but her fingers kept brushing the leather cover like it was calling her, softly, patiently. The water babbled beside her, reflecting the clouded sky. Moss grew thick along the banks, and dragonflies skimmed the surface in lazy zigzags. Everything felt timeless. She followed the winding path until she reached a clearing, a circle of stone benches nestled among ancient oaks. At the center stood a statue of a woman with her hands open, as if offering something invisible to the sky. Birds had nested in the curls of her stone hair. Vines wrapped gently around her ankles. Clara sat on one of the benches, closed her eyes, and simply breathed. She didn't think about the apartment she'd left behind, or the emails unanswered, or the expectations that used to press on her chest like a heavy coat. In this place, those things didn't matter. What mattered was the wind through the trees, the steady rhythm of her breath, the way silence felt not empty, but full. She opened the journal. At first, the page stared back, blank and quiet. But then, slowly, words began to arrive, not polished, not perfect, just real. She wrote about the sound of the birds, the warmth of Miriam's kitchen, the kindness in a stranger's smile, the peace that came not from doing, but from being. She lost track of time. It wasn't until a bell rang faintly from the village chapel that she realized the afternoon had passed into evening. She stood, stretched, and walked back the way she came, journal in hand, heart just a little lighter. As she returned to the lantern house, lights glowed in the windows. Miriam met her at the door with a lantern in one hand and a soft blanket draped over her arm. "Come, my dear," she said. "Let's sit on the porch a while. The stars will be out soon." They sat side by side on the wooden swing, wrapped in blankets, sipping warm apple cider. The lantern flickered between them, casting dancing shadows on the porch rails. Above, the sky was beginning to clear. One by one, stars appeared, first a few, then dozens, then hundreds. A soft breeze passed through the trees, and in that moment, Clara realized something she hadn't known before. She wasn't lost. She was exactly where she needed to be. Miriam seemed to hear her thoughts. "Sometimes," she whispered, "you don't have to chase the light. You just have to be still enough for it to find you." Clara smiled softly, her eyes fixed on the stars. And for the first time in a long time, she felt no rush to move, no pressure to be anywhere else. Just here. Just this. Just now. That night, sleep came to Clara like a tide, slow and steady, washing over her in gentle waves. She dreamed of the garden behind the lantern house, but the flowers glowed faintly in moonlight, and soft music drifted through the air, as if the wind itself had a lullaby to sing. In the dream, she walked barefoot on dew-covered grass, passing beneath arches of ivy and starlight. Fireflies floated lazily beside her, their glow pulsing like a heartbeat. And ahead, at the edge of the garden, stood the statue she had seen earlier in the clearing. But this time, the stone woman turned her head and smiled. Clara didn't feel fear. Only warmth. Only wonder. She reached out, and when their hands met, a ripple of light spread across the garden like a memory awakening. Flowers bloomed where she stepped. The trees swayed in rhythm with her breath. The air whispered her name, not loudly, but like a mother calling a child home. When she woke, morning light was spilling across the floor, golden and soft. She sat up slowly, feeling the kind of rest that doesn't just come from sleep, but from being truly at peace. The journal rested on the nightstand beside her, a flower pressed between the pages she didn't remember picking. Downstairs, Miriam greeted her with a knowing look. "The garden speaks in dreams," she said, pouring tea. "When the soul is ready to listen." Clara didn't ask how she knew. Questions like that no longer felt necessary in Eldergrove. After breakfast, she wandered again, this time toward the forest at the edge of the village. Tall pines and oaks stood like guardians, their trunks wrapped in moss and memory. The path beneath her feet was soft with fallen needles. Somewhere far above, a hawk cried out, and the wind carried its echo. She followed a narrow trail that dipped and curved until it led to a quiet glen, where a stream formed a mirror-clear pond. There was a log to sit on, smoothed by time, and a scent of wild mint in the air. Clara sat there for a long time, writing in her journal. Not just words now, but stories. Memories she thought she'd forgotten. Moments she hadn't realized mattered. A letter to her younger self. A promise to her future one. When she finally returned to the village, evening was falling again, and golden light poured through the trees like honey. The lantern house welcomed her like an old friend, its windows glowing, its door open. That night, she didn't need a fire or a warm drink to feel comforted. The comfort was inside her now, planted like a seed, growing slowly. As she lay down in bed, the breeze outside sang through the trees. The stars watched from above. And Clara, once a restless traveler, now drifted into sleep with a heart full of stillness. The morning of her third day in Eldergrove was different, not louder, not busier, just clearer. The mist had lifted completely, revealing hills in the distance that Clara hadn't noticed before. The air felt fresher, as if the world had taken a deep breath overnight and exhaled something new. She stepped outside with her journal tucked under her arm, wearing a scarf Miriam had left for her, a knitted thing the color of wild sage. A small note had been pinned to it. For wandering with warmth. Clara smiled and began to walk, this time with purpose. Not to escape anything. Not to find something. But simply to be with the village. With the woods. With herself. She wandered beyond the stream and into the orchard, trees heavy with fruit, the scent of apples and earth thick in the air. She sat beneath a tree and wrote again. Not in a rush. Not to finish anything. Just to remember the feeling of stillness. Villagers passed by now and then. A girl with a basket full of pears offered her one. An old man tipped his hat as he strolled by with a wooden cane. No one asked questions. No one hurried. Everyone seemed to move with the same rhythm, as if Eldergrove taught them how to breathe slower. Later, back at the lantern house, Miriam sat at the kitchen table with a stack of old letters and a steaming pot of rose tea. Clara joined her, and they spent the afternoon in quiet companionship, occasionally speaking, mostly just existing together in the warmth. As the day dimmed, Miriam turned to Clara and said, "Do you know what you'll do when you leave?" Clara blinked, surprised. "I hadn't thought about leaving." Miriam nodded. "That means you've healed more than you know." They sat a little longer, the light outside growing softer, more golden. That night, Clara returned to the garden. Not in a dream, but in waking stillness. Fireflies danced again. The wind hummed its song. And at the far end of the garden, she saw a small stone path she hadn't noticed before. She followed it, each step quiet and steady, until she came to a wooden gate beneath a canopy of wisteria. Beyond it lay a grove full of glowing flowers and quiet benches, and at the center, a tiny pond that reflected the stars like glass. Clara sat on the edge, watching her reflection ripple gently in the water. And for the first time, she spoke aloud. "I'm ready. Not to go back to the old life. Not to run forward blindly. But to live more softly, more slowly. With presence. With wonder." Eldergrove had given her that, not with grand revelations or loud transformations, but with gentleness. With silence. With space to breathe. That night, as she lay beneath the same patchwork quilt, she didn't feel like a guest anymore. She felt like a part of the story. And in that soft, sacred silence, Clara let her eyes close one final time in Eldergrove, carried off once more by the trees, the wind, and the hush of stars whispering, "You are home." The morning sun crept slowly across the floorboards of Clara's room, golden and unhurried. Birds sang outside her window, as they always had since the day she arrived, but today their songs carried a different feeling, like a gentle farewell. She rose from bed quietly, wrapping the sage-colored scarf around her shoulders. Her journal lay on the nightstand, its pages no longer blank. Words filled it now, stories, thoughts, quiet promises. The once empty book had become a reflection of her journey, and in many ways, a map back to herself. Downstairs, Miriam was already in the kitchen, preparing toast with honey and stewed berries. The air smelled of comfort. She turned as Clara entered, her eyes soft, knowing. Today? She asked simply. Clara nodded. Yes. I think so. Miriam didn't speak right away. Instead, she poured 2 cups of tea, set them on the table, and joined her at the bench by the window. Eldergrove doesn't ask you to stay, she said after a moment. It just asks that you carry its peace with you. Clara looked out at the garden, where the wind gently moved the lavender stems. What if I forget? She whispered. Miriam smiled. You won't. It's in you now. They sat together for a long time, sipping tea, watching the light shift through the trees. When it was time to go, Clara packed slowly. Not because she was reluctant, but because she wanted to honor every object, every sound, the hush of the wooden drawers, the creak of the stairs, the warmth of her room. She placed her journal on top of her folded clothes, then paused, looking around one last time. The village waited outside. As she stepped through the door, she found the path that had brought her here was still there, but somehow clearer, less hidden. It hadn't changed. She had. Miriam stood at the gate. You'll return, she said. When the world grows loud again, and you need to remember how quiet feels. Clara embraced her gently. Thank you. For everything. Miriam didn't answer, only placed a hand on Clara's shoulder and gave a small nod. As Clara turned to leave, she heard one final whisper behind her. The trees will remember you. And so Clara walked, down the lane, past the stone bridge, beneath the old oaks. She didn't rush. She didn't worry. The noise of the world would return, yes, but now, she knew where the silence lived. It lived in her breath, in her pace, in the pages of a little leather journal, in the memory of a village where nothing was expected of her but rest. And as the trees of Eldergrove faded slowly into the distance, Clara smiled to herself, peaceful and whole, carrying a quiet magic in her heart that would never leave. Weeks passed. The world beyond Eldergrove was still the same, fast, buzzing, restless. But Clara, she wasn't. She returned to her small apartment in the city, where everything was just as she'd left it, keys in the bowl by the door, a half-used candle on the coffee table, a stack of unread mail. But she stood in the center of it all with a new kind of stillness in her bones. She unpacked gently. Her journal, now nearly full, she placed on her nightstand. The scarf Miriam had gifted her was draped over the back of her favorite chair. And in the kitchen window, she placed a small pot of lavender, its scent soft and steady. Clara didn't rush back to her old routines. She didn't fill her days the way she used to. Instead, she began to rise with the sun, not because she had to, but because she wanted to greet the quiet morning. She sipped her tea slowly, walked more, talked less, smiled often. And every night, before bed, she would open her journal, not always to write, sometimes just to read a page or two, to remember how it felt to walk beneath whispering trees, or to sip tea by the fire with Miriam. One evening, after a long, gentle day, she sat by her window as rain began to fall. The sound tapped lightly against the glass, and the city softened beneath it. She closed her eyes and listened. She could almost hear the wind through the pines, the distant bell from the village chapel, the creak of the lantern house porch swing. She missed Eldergrove, but not in a way that hurt. She missed it like you miss a dream that stays with you all day, a place you carry inside. One weekend, Clara took a train north. She didn't have a plan, just a journal, a scarf, and a desire to walk somewhere quiet. She got off at a small town she'd never heard of, wandered into a bookstore, and found herself drawn to a shelf near the back. Among the worn spines, there was a book with no title. She opened it. Inside was a single sentence. Some places never leave you, even when you leave them. She smiled and looked around. The shopkeeper, an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes, was watching her, as if she knew. Clara placed the book back on the shelf and walked outside. The air smelled of pine. And though she knew she wasn't in Eldergrove, she also knew she was never far from it. Not really. Because Eldergrove wasn't just a village. It was a state of being. A rhythm. A remembering. and Clara had learned to carry it with her. Always. Autumn returned, and with it came golden leaves, soft sweaters, and the scent of wood smoke curling from distant chimneys. Clara walked through the city's quiet parks, her journal now completely filled, each page etched with memories and reflections born from her time in Eldergrove. But this season, something stirred in her, a gentle pull, like the hush of wind through branches calling her name. One evening, as twilight fell and the sky turned dusky blue, Clara stood by her window and whispered, "If it's still there, I'll find it again." She didn't pack much this time. Just a satchel with a new journal, Miriam's scarf, and a flask of tea. The rest didn't matter. What mattered was the journey. She didn't drive this time. She walked. Through neighborhoods and into the countryside. Every step reminded her of what it meant to move slowly, not with purpose, but with presence. The signs were subtle. A bird landing just long enough to watch her before flying ahead. A gate left slightly open, creaking softly in the breeze. A fallen leaf shaped like a heart. And then, just beyond a bend in a country road she didn't recognize, she saw it. The trees. Tall. Familiar. Whispering. Her chest filled with warmth and something close to awe. She stepped through the wooden archway she hadn't remembered until now, and there it was. Eldergrove. Just as it had been, and yet somehow changed, gentler, deeper. The lantern house stood waiting, its windows glowing like welcome. Miriam opened the door before Clara could knock. Her eyes sparkled, as if she'd only seen her yesterday. "You've kept the quiet well," she said softly. Clara laughed through the mist in her eyes. "I tried." Inside, everything was where it belonged. The fire crackled. The tea steeped. The armchair still hugged her like an old friend. And on the mantel, resting beneath a smooth river stone, was a letter addressed simply, "To the one who remembers." That night Clara sat beneath the stars in the garden, a new journal open in her lap. She didn't need to write anything yet. It was enough just to be. The wind rustled the lavender. The earth smelled of memory. And somewhere, an owl called softly. Eldergrove had returned to her, not just as a place, but as a knowing. A reminder that the quiet is always waiting. And we only need to listen. Clara stayed in Eldergrove longer this time. Not because she needed to heal, she had already done that. This time, she stayed because she simply loved being there. Each morning she woke before the sun rose, slipping on her scarf and wandering into the woods to greet the day as it stretched across the treetops. The villagers welcomed her without ceremony. Children waved as she passed. The old man with the cane tipped his hat as always. And Miriam, ever watchful, simply smiled and placed another steaming cup of tea in Clara's hands each morning without asking. "You've become part of the rhythm," she said one evening as they shelled peas by the fireplace. "You move like someone who knows the language of the trees." Clara smiled. "They taught me." She spent her days walking, writing, sometimes baking bread in the kitchen with Miriam, or reading to the children at the village square. At dusk, she often sat near the chapel bell and listened to its single chime echo through the hills. But as much as she loved the simplicity of this life, she knew she wouldn't stay forever. Eldergrove was never meant to be a place one clung to. It was a gift, offered in moments of quiet return. One morning, as frost kissed the edges of the garden, Clara awoke with a sense of stillness so deep it almost hummed in her chest. She stepped outside and found Miriam waiting with 2 cups of tea, wrapped in soft steam. They sat together in silence. "There's someone else out there now," Miriam said after a while. "Someone walking. Lost. Looking." Clara nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. Later that afternoon, she took a final walk through the village. Past the bookstore where a new keeper now sorted the shelves. Past the stone bridge. Into the clearing where the statue stood, hands open, eyes skyward. Clara placed a hand gently on the statue's arm and whispered a silent thank you. Back at the lantern house, she packed her satchel. This time, the journal wasn't full. But that was the point. There was more story to live, more stillness to share. Miriam hugged her gently at the gate. "The world is hungry for quiet," she said. You've tasted it. Share it. Clara began walking again, not away, not toward, just walking. She passed beneath the trees, now dusted with frost. The wind didn't say goodbye, it said until next time. And Clara, her heart full of peace, carried Eldergrove within her, step by gentle step, back into the world that had almost forgotten how to be still. But she hadn't. And now, either would anyone who listened. Clara's return to the outside world was quiet, deliberate. There was no grand announcement, no urgent purpose. Just her presence, steady, warm, like the first rays of morning sun sliding across a windowsill. People noticed, though they couldn't quite explain what had changed. Her voice was softer. Her smile lingered longer. Her eyes, calm and unhurried, seemed to see things most others missed. She didn't rush back into work or commitments. Instead, she began to weave stillness into the spaces around her. She hosted quiet tea evenings in her apartment, where phones were put away, and people sat in soft candlelight sharing stories or simply enjoying the silence together. She started writing small notes, gentle words of comfort, and leaving them in books at the library, under cafe saucers, on train seats. Not for recognition. Just to offer something still, something kind. At the community garden, she planted lavender and mint. She taught children how to feel the wind with their palms. She showed neighbors how to sit with a tree without saying a word. And people began to change. One by one, without noticing it at first, they slowed down. They lingered longer at crosswalks, watched birds from their balconies, sat on benches with no phones in their hands. Some asked Clara quietly, "How did you learn to be like this?" She never spoke of Eldergrove directly. She would only smile and say, "It begins with listening, and remembering you don't have to fill every silence." But one winter night, while snow drifted softly outside, she received a letter. It was handwritten in looping script she didn't recognize. It said only, "Thank you. I found the path." The trees remembered. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the page. It had begun. Somehow, the stillness she carried had spread, not by force, not by speech, but by presence. A quiet chain, linking dreamers and wanderers, one heartbeat at a time. That night, she opened a new journal. And on the first page, she wrote, "Eldergrove lives in the hearts of those who remember how to be quiet." Then she placed the book on her nightstand, blew out the candle, and closed her eyes, breathing deeply, peacefully, as the snow whispered against the glass like trees in a dream. Spring came gently. Clara woke one morning to the sound of rain tapping softly on her windows, the kind of steady rhythm that made you want to stay beneath warm blankets just a little longer. But there was something else in the air, something fresh, fragrant, alive. She rose slowly, her movements like unfolding petals. The world outside had changed overnight. Trees were budding, the garden down the street was beginning to bloom again, and the scent of wet earth filled the breeze. She wrapped herself in Miriam's scarf, now worn soft with time, and stepped outside. The city was quiet in the early morning rain. Drops clung to flower petals. A street cat sat under a bench, blinking sleepily. Somewhere, a kettle whistled behind a half-open window. Clara walked. She followed no path in particular, only the quiet. Past bookstores and corner cafes, past stone steps and alleys lined with ivy. She paused at the park, sat on her favorite bench beneath the birch trees, and listened to the world breathe. In her hands she held her second journal, half full now. Her handwriting had changed. Softer loops, more space between words. The rhythm of someone who wasn't in a hurry. As she sat, a little girl passed by, holding her father's hand. The girl looked at Clara, then up at the trees, then back again. She tugged her father's arm. "Daddy," she whispered, "I think the trees are talking." Clara smiled. Yes, she thought. You're already listening. Back home, she opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of blank journals. One by one, she wrote inside each cover, "This book belongs to a soul ready for stillness." She gave them away in quiet ways, tucked into mailboxes, left in waiting rooms, passed to strangers with nothing but a nod. And every time, something stirred. A look. A pause. A spark. The stillness was spreading. Not like wildfire, but like rain. Quiet, nourishing, unseen at first, yet everywhere. And Clara knew that one day, someone else would find the path, through the trees, to the door with the lantern, to the house that waited. Because Eldergrove was not a secret to keep. It was a rhythm to share. A seed planted with silence. And as long as someone listened, truly listened, it would always bloom again. The years unfolded gently. Clara didn't mark them with calendars or milestones, but with seasons of stillness. Winters spent reading by the fire, springs that bloomed lavender and quiet conversations, summers filled with slow walks under evening skies, and autumns when leaves danced like golden whispers through the air. She grew older, yes. The lines on her face deepened softly, like the folds of a well-loved book. But her spirit stayed light, untangled by time. And Eldergrove? It lived on, not as a fixed place on a map, but as a gentle current moving quietly through the world. Clara would sometimes meet others who had found it, though they never said the name. They would only exchange a knowing glance, a slow smile, the kind that said, "You've heard the trees too, haven't you?" One summer morning, as the city rested under soft clouds, Clara received a visitor. A young woman stood at her doorstep, damp from travel, eyes wide and tired in the way Clara remembered from her own journey. She held a worn envelope with no return address. Inside it was a single line. "When the world grows too loud, find the one who carries the quiet." The woman looked at Clara with hope trembling behind her voice. "Is that you?" Clara didn't answer with words. She only opened the door wider and motioned her inside. They sat by the window with tea and silence between them. No explanation was needed. The quiet spoke for itself. Over the following days, the young woman walked the same parks Clara once had, sat on the same benches, listened to the same hush in the trees. And slowly, her shoulders softened, her eyes cleared, her breath deepened. And Clara watched. She didn't guide. She didn't teach. She simply held space. Because that was what Eldergrove had taught her. Peace isn't something you give to someone, it's something you remind them they already hold inside. One evening, just before the girl was ready to leave, Clara handed her a journal. Inside it read, "Somewhere, the trees are waiting. You'll know when it's time." The girl wept gently, not from sadness, but from recognition. Then she hugged Clara, and left as quietly as she'd come. Alone again, Clara stood by the open window, watching the light fade across the rooftops. She didn't know when, or how, or to whom, but she knew Eldergrove would call again. And someone, somewhere, would listen. Time passed, as it always does, softly and without fanfare. Clara grew slower in her steps, but never in her spirit. She still walked to the park when the skies were quiet. She still wrote in her journals, now a full shelf's worth. And every now and then, she'd find a letter slipped under her door, or a stranger on her porch, holding silence in their eyes and wondering if they, too, could learn to breathe. She always welcomed them. One gray morning, rain soft as breath tapping the windows, Clara awoke with a memory she hadn't held in years. A vision of the lantern house, glowing in the dusk. The fire, the scent of pine, Miriam's steady eyes watching her from across a steaming cup of tea. And just like that, Clara knew. It was time to return. Not because she was lost. Not because she needed healing. But because home was calling her back. Not the apartment, not the city, not even the people, but the stillness. The source. She didn't pack much. A scarf. A pen. An empty journal. The journey was quieter this time. Fewer distractions, fewer detours. She didn't wonder if she would find the path again, because she knew the path had always known her. When she stepped beneath the old trees, they bowed gently in the wind, like old friends. And there it was, the lantern house. Not aged. Not changed. Just waiting. Miriam opened the door, older now, silver hair woven with strands of white. But her eyes, oh, her eyes, still glowed like firelight. "I knew you'd come," she whispered, no louder than the breeze. I didn't think I'd need to, Clara replied, voice trembling with the weight of memory. Miriam smiled. We all return. Not to remember, but to rest. Inside, everything was where she had left it. The chair, the blanket, the low hum of the fire. Clara sat, wrapped in silence, her heart slowing like a leaf drifting to water. They didn't speak much that evening. They didn't need to. And that night, Clara slept the kind of sleep that has no dreams. Only peace. The kind of sleep that comes when the journey is complete. And all that's left is the stillness you became. The morning light arrived gently, as if not to disturb the hush that had settled over the house. Miriam moved quietly through the kitchen, her steps soft as always. She brewed tea, laid out slices of honey bread, and set a single wildflower in a jar on the table, just as she had every day for years. Clara awoke slowly, her breath deep and steady, her body cocooned in warmth. She lay still for a while, eyes closed, listening to the soft creaks of the old house and the birds singing just beyond the window. Then she sat up, dressed slowly, and stepped barefoot onto the wooden floor. When she entered the kitchen, Miriam was already there, waiting with a smile that said more than words ever could. They sat together for a long time, sipping tea. Outside, the wind moved through the trees in waves, like a lullaby still playing long after the dream had ended. Miriam, Clara said at last, her voice a whisper. How long have you been here? Miriam looked out the window, her eyes far away. Long enough to know the rhythm of every bird that nests in the trees, she said, and short enough to still be surprised by the first bloom of spring. Clara nodded. That was all she needed to hear. Later that day, Clara wandered through the garden one final time. The lavender had returned in bloom. The statue stood quietly among the moss, her hands still open to the sky. She touched the edge of the stone, closed her eyes, and felt the hush settle deep within her. It wasn't goodbye. It was gratitude. When she returned to the house, she found a small leather-bound journal on her pillow. A note lay on top. For your next beginning. That night, Clara sat by the fire with Miriam. The logs crackled softly. Outside, the wind curled around the eaves like a lullaby. Inside, silence stretched warm and full between them. I think it's time, Clara said softly. Miriam gave a small nod. I know. They embraced, and Clara held the moment close. The house. The stillness. The knowing. And the next morning, just before dawn, Clara stepped through the doorway once more. No bag. No map. Just the new journal in her hand and a piece in her chest that would carry her wherever she needed to go. The trees didn't whisper goodbye. They simply bowed in the wind and watched her walk on, wrapped in quiet, returning again to the world, not as someone seeking stillness, but as someone who had become it. Clara's final journey was not marked by roads or destinations. It was a journey inward, a gentle, continuous unfolding, like petals meeting sunlight, like water finding its own shape. She no longer needed signs or symbols. The stillness walked beside her, always. She lived quietly, not hidden, but with intention. Her home, now a small cottage on the edge of a wooded field, was open to those who wandered. Not many came, but those who did always left lighter. They rarely knew why. She never explained. She simply listened, offered tea, sat beside them as they wept, or wondered, or remembered how to breathe again. Sometimes they spoke of dreams that led them through trees and toward a warm, flickering light. Sometimes they described a house that smelled of pine and lavender, and a woman who knew their name before they spoke it. Clara never asked. She only smiled and said, You heard the trees. That's more than enough. Her hair turned silver. Her steps slowed. But her spirit, rooted deep in quiet, remained untouched by time. In her final season, she wrote in her last journal. Each page was careful, tender, full of soft truths and small miracles. On the final page, in ink that faded like dusk, she wrote, Stillness is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of everything that matters. Then she closed the book, wrapped it in cloth, and placed it on the shelf beside all the others. One early morning, with mist lying gently across the field and the first light touching her windows, Clara sat in her chair by the fire. She took a slow, full breath, and smiled. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to return. And somewhere, not far from here, a path appeared beneath the trees. A house lit its lantern. A fire began to crackle. And Eldergrove opened its arms once more, waiting, as it always had, for the next traveler, ready to remember. Long after Clara's final breath melted into the morning mist, the cottage by the wooded field remained. No one claimed it. No one sold it. Yet it never felt empty. The wind still circled through its eaves. Birds still sang on its windowsills. And the garden, the garden, flourished. Neighbors said the soil there was richer, that the lavender bloomed longer, that when the breeze passed through the trees nearby, it carried something old, kind, familiar. A young woman found the cottage one spring day, her shoes muddy from wandering, her heart heavy with noise. She didn't know why she stopped at the gate. She only knew that when she did, something deep inside her unclenched. The gate creaked open without protest. The door followed. The house welcomed her with soft shadows and the scent of cedarwood and earth. On a small table near the fireplace, she found a journal wrapped in faded cloth. Inside, the first page held a single line in delicate handwriting. "The quiet you seek is already within you." She didn't question who wrote it. She simply stayed. Not forever, just long enough. Long enough to feel her shoulders drop. Long enough to wake with the sun and fall asleep to the lullaby of trees. Long enough to find her breath again. And when she left the journal behind. But before closing the cover, she added her own line beneath the first. "And the stillness grows stronger when we share it." Over the years, others came. They came without direction, led only by an ache to remember something they could not name. Each one found the house in their own time. Each one stayed until their hearts knew what to carry forward. No one lived there permanently. But the cottage was never truly empty. Because some places are more than wood and stone. Some places are made of memory, and silence, and kindness passed gently from one soul to another. And somewhere far beyond the cities and the noise, Eldergrove still waits. In a garden that never forgets. Beneath trees that remember every footstep. And inside the hearts of those who have learned the sacred rhythm of the quiet. Seasons continued their quiet dance over the cottage, snow resting softly on its roof, blossoms unfolding at its doorstep, golden leaves swirling across its worn path. And still, the house waited. Not for attention, not for praise, just for the next soul ready to slow down and listen. One dusky autumn evening, a boy no older than 10 wandered to the edge of the forest, chasing the echo of wind chimes he swore weren't there a moment before. His parents were nearby, distracted, calling his name, but the boy only heard the breeze whispering through the trees like a story waiting to be told. He stepped beyond the branches, past the hush of pine and the silver hush of birch, until he saw it, a crooked little gate, half covered in ivy, and behind it, a cottage with golden light glowing from its windows. No one answered when he knocked. But the door opened with a quiet creak, like an old friend smiling. He stepped inside. A fire crackled. A cat purred atop a thick cushion. On a low table sat a book with no title, its pages fluttering slightly though the air was still. He opened it, and instead of printed words, he saw handwritings, hundreds of different lines, all beginning with the same soft greeting. "To the one who has arrived." The rest varied. Some were stories, some were blessings, others were single words. "Breathe. Welcome. It's okay to rest now. You are not lost. You made it." The boy ran his fingers across the ink. Though he didn't fully understand why, he felt a warmth bloom in his chest, something like comfort, like home. He stayed only minutes. But when he stepped back outside, the woods felt different. Calmer. He turned once to look at the cottage again, but it was no longer there. Just a patch of sunlight and wind in the trees. He said nothing to his parents when they asked where he'd gone. But that night, he picked up a pencil, and for the first time in his short life, wrote in a notebook before bed. One sentence. No name. No explanation. Just this. There is a house where the world grows quiet, and I think it knows my name. And far away, in a place not on any map. The lantern flickered once more. And the garden whispered softly, he will return. Years slipped by like silk. The boy grew. He forgot the path through the trees, forgot the creak of that old gate, forgot even the warmth of the fire that had welcomed him so long ago. Life became louder, filled with tests, clocks, crowded rooms, and the constant buzz of things to do. But sometimes, just before sleep, he would feel it again. That hush. That breath. That golden flicker of something long ago and almost remembered. He didn't know where it came from, only that it felt safe. Like he had once known a secret too soft to speak. When he became a young man, he traveled. He searched, not for anything in particular, only for a feeling. He wandered mountains and coasts, cities and ruins. Always moving, always listening for that forgotten echo. One evening, in a fog-covered valley where no signal reached, he followed a footpath made by deer and rain. He walked until the sun dipped low and the mist thickened around him. That's when he heard it. The wind chimes. He stopped. Not just because of the sound, but because something inside him stilled. Something that had not been quiet in years. His heart slowed. His breath deepened. And then, as if he'd always known the way, he turned left at the bent cedar tree and stepped through the mist. There it was. The cottage. The gate. The ivy. The light in the window. Tears filled his eyes before he could understand why. He pushed the gate. It opened with the exact same creak. The door was unlocked. The fire was lit. The cat was older now, gray at the muzzle, but it lifted its head and blinked as if to say, "Welcome back." And on the same table, wrapped in cloth, was the journal. He opened it. His own handwriting was still there from long ago, childish and careful. There is a house where the world grows quiet, and I think it knows my name. Below it, someone had written just one word. Yes. That night he stayed. Not to escape. Not to find answers. But simply to remember. To remember that peace isn't something you chase. It's something you return to. Again and again. Until one day. It never leaves you. Morning rose gently over the valley, mist clinging to the tops of trees like a dream that didn't want to let go. Inside the cottage, the young man, now not quite a boy, not yet old, stood barefoot at the hearth. He had slept long and deeply, without fear or interruption, wrapped in a silence that had nothing to do with the absence of noise, and everything to do with the presence of peace. He made tea without needing to be taught. The kettle, the cups, the tiny jar of honey, they were all exactly where they should be, as if his hands had always known them. When he sat down at the table, the cat curled beside his feet and purred once before drifting into its own slow rhythm of sleep. He didn't need to go anywhere. Not today. Maybe not for a long while. That day, he opened the journal again, not just to read, but to write. This time, the words came with ease, without pretense or plan. If you've found this place, trust that you were meant to. You don't need permission to rest. You don't need a reason to be still. You are already enough, even when the world forgets how to say so. He closed the journal gently and placed it back in its place. The hours passed not by clocks, but by light. The sun moved slowly across the windowsill. Shadows danced across the old wooden floor. The breeze outside was soft, like fingers brushing through tall grass. Somewhere beyond the trees, an owl called even though it was midday, as if to remind the valley that time was not linear here. He stayed for many days, though he did not count them. Sometimes he walked the woods, hearing echoes of laughter he couldn't place. Other times he sat beneath the statue in the garden, eyes closed, hand resting on stone, breathing the way the trees seemed to breathe. And slowly, without fanfare or realization, something in him shifted. The ache he had carried for years, so familiar it had become part of him, lifted. Not all at once. Not like a storm passing. More like morning light warming frost until it simply disappeared. Eventually, the day came when he stood at the cottage door with his journal in one hand and his heart in both. The world beyond the trees hadn't changed. But he had. And now he carried something the world needed, even if it didn't know it was missing. Before stepping through the gate, he turned back once, not to say goodbye. Because you never truly leave Eldergrove. You carry it. In your step. In your voice. In your silence. And as he walked forward, through mist and memory, his spirit steady and his breath slow, a new wind swept through the valley. The house stood still. The fire kept burning. The lantern flickered in the window, waiting, quietly, patiently, for whoever would come next.